Okay. So a big thing that I always try to do with these is more of like a question and answer with a story time part. So is there some piece, one of you just mentioned listening, hearing something about Goon's history? Is there a specific like event or time frame you guys want to start with? Some kind of primer for me to get going.
The Trail of Tears.
So rather not a bad one. That's before my time, but I do know what it was. Um, so for those of you who are not familiar with this occurred before Jump Fatigue. So the version that I was involved with occurred after Jump Fatigue, um, and so it's been debated as to how many of these things there have been through uh, Goon's history. But it's something along the lines of three or four of them. The first one um, occurred, and it was a move up. Um, and so the move up was to bring capitals from the north down to from the area of Declan down south, basically into Fountain kind of a piece. Um, and it was there's a picture if anybody has that. I don't have it linked with me. I could put it in fleet there, but there's a picture of it, and it basically shows the FCs at the time trying to move caps and supers and titans from there. Again, no jump fatigue, so you just have to recharge your capacitor, which is actually pretty easy to do, and then get to jump cap for it. Back in those days when fatigue, didn't exist at all, we had multiple fits. You had a travel fit, which you would use to literally be able to move around with. That generally had cap rechargers in it and low slots to decrease your capacitor. Because the thing with capital ships, and it's still the same way today, is that it doesn't matter how many like gigajoules are in your capacitor. If you're undocked anywhere and you hold your cursor over your capacitor, right, you'll see that number. What that number is doesn't matter in absolute terms. It matters the percentage of that total. So if your capacitor is at 700 and it's out of 1,000, so you're at 70%, you can't jump. But if it's at 700 out of 720, then you're able to jump. So that absolute value doesn't matter. It's the percent that matters. And so Travel Fits had cap rechargers to recharge it faster, and they had a couple of the modules in the low slots. I think they were power diagnostics, although I'm forgetting. We haven't used those in a long time. I think that's what they were, to lower the absolute amount of cap, but it would allow it to recharge quicker because you needed just to get to that magic number. The 75% is what we always wanted. Let me see if that's the picture. That's the picture. So those of you who are in fleet right now, Demas has found the a picture for you. That's the original Trail of Tears. YO was a capital of Goonswarm. At one point in time, it goes back and forth. When we lived in Deck, it was YO at this point. And it came down to Aquarius, so we were going to F20Y at that point. But it was the Major Capital Flux Coil. Yeah, thanks. That's right. PDEs are the other one. That's a different thing. Yeah, the Capital Flux Coil. So you'd have full cap fit. You'd have a full mid slot of cap rechargers and the low slots of the flux coils, the capacitor flux coils. And if you did that, you could actually recharge your capacitor on a regular capital, a super, or a Titan extraordinarily fast. I've seen some where before that 10-second jump invuln timer was done, somebody's cap was recharged and they could jump again. So all you had to do is you had to have fuel, you had to have a Sino, and you had to have capacitor. There was no jumping through gates, right? Supers, Titans could not jump through stargates like they can now. And there was no jump fatigue. Zen, I will get that for you. There you go. With the MWD for less total cap, yeah, there was any number of tricks that people used to use. I have to admit, I don't remember that one for an MWD thing, but the flux coils and the cap recharges are what I always used to use. So you'd carry like 10 of them in every one of your caps. So that was the Trail of Tears, just a movement. If you guys are in fleet and can see that picture, um, I have no trouble believing that those quotes in there are real. Having done any number of move ops myself with Sinos and just being in move ops, I can totally see that that's an accurate recording of whoever was running that. It doesn't say who was seeing that fleet, so I don't know. Render, I know that was your question. Were you on that Trail of Tears, or is it just something
No,
that?
I was before my time. It's just something I wanted to start with.
The ticker being Condi, yeah, that just goes way back. I've heard a couple of different versions of it, and none of them really make sense. Uh, so, sorry, I wish I could give you a better answer than that. It's that's one version that you just see there, right? So you see all different kinds, and it's something that entertained one person at one point in time. Um, I've got a couple of alt corps that are named, and it's because somebody said something in a channel, and I'm like, oh, that's a pretty clever alt corp. So, or the name of an actual alt. Um, I made some during uh, Vietnam when I was talking to the command channels one day. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make some new Sinos, and I made one whose name is "Did you read the ping?" Just because somebody had complained about somebody not reading a ping on a fleet. I'm like, I wonder if that name's available, and it was. So I made an alt like that. You'd be surprised how many times this comes up with names for corporations or alts or alliances. That's because somebody said something, not even necessarily in Eve, and somebody's like, "Oh, that's pretty clever," or stupid. It's usually one of those two. It's that's very clever, or that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I wonder if that's taken, and then you get that. But I saw you put that in channel one day. I was like, no, go away. If you guys have any questions you want to just ask on comms too, that's totally fine because there's by far more of you in the comms channels than there is on in the fleet. I so, but what do you think the positives were after Jay's theft? Um, it let me as chief of staff clean up some stuff that was annoying me, and that's a big piece of it. So things that weren't um, as secure as I would have liked them simply because of historical reasons um, were made by far more secure because of that. It was a bummer, right? It's definitely a lame thing to have happen, but on the whole, it did allow us to reset some things and update a whole bunch of stuff that hadn't been touched in literally years. Mr. Hero, read the OOTD. That one is not one of mine. I've got one very much like that, but that's actually not one of mine. It's a good one. I may have to look up who that person is and yell at them because it's very similar. It's got a similar naming, but mine is "Did you read the ping?" Um, and I've got a couple others, but yeah, that one's not mine. Yeah, a couple of corps did. As Nemus is saying, after that theft, which was last year, so it's over 6 months ago now. Uh, a number of corporations came together and to help. The biggest one that I saw was for implants, people who lost implants. That was kind of one of the biggest ones that I saw. Being more specifically, what are you asking for? We've declassified some stuff from Vietnam, right? It kind of depends. There's pieces that we would we will never declassify just because it would burn active agents. Uh, right? You mean who lit the Sino on the PanFam side? So that was never classified. You can go back and look at all the videos and you can see who that was. I don't remember their name off the top of my head, but you can absolutely see it on all the videos and everything from the time. You can see it on the overviews. I just don't remember what their name is. Uh, I will tell you guys, this was a good one from Vietnam. We had the um, Siege of M2, right, where we were holding all of them in there, uh, and everything was sitting there, and we've got all those caps and all those supers and titans, and we offered them the silver ticket, which was we would buy their titan or their super from them for a pretty steep discount. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're still Goonies, but we were gonna buy it and guarantee them payment for the hull and the fit and everything like that. Um, on the theory that if they took it, they'd get something, and if they didn't, we'd blow it up. I was actually telling this story to a couple people on Thursday. We had one person take up that offer for a Titan. I don't remember which one it was. Might have been a Leviathan. I can't remember now. And a few of us were in the command channels. We were all hiding out in one of the commands so we could talk to the people running the camp fleet. We all get into position because what we had to do, you guys remember the insane bubble field. We had no idea exactly where this Titan was going to log in at. We knew it would be in the bubbles. We just didn't know where it would. And it was above the keep star. We knew that. The person had told us they were above the keep star, but it'd been weeks since they had logged out. They weren't sure exactly where they were. So several of us had spread ships out on the top of the keep star. This Titan logs in, and of course it's a hostile Titan. Maybe 3 seconds later, you just see this wall of fighters and fighter bombers coming up from the keep star from everybody who was there. And we're yelling on the command channel to whoever's running the gate camp fleet. I don't honestly remember who it was. Like, pull them back, bring back those fighters. And the vast majority of people did, but a handful still, were coming up after them. And so we're bumping this Titan. We're hitting this Titan out of the bubbles. Because what we had to do was sino it into the Imperial Palace. We had them in the fleet. We had a sino active on the Imperial Palace there. We'd set it specially so that this one person could dock in the Imperial Palace. And it was a risk, right? Because if he hadn't actually sold us that Titan, then we sinoed out an enemy Titan, right? So it was a risk. We all knew that. Um, but he sinoed it in and he, stuck to his agreement. He got out of the Titan, contracted it to us. Um, I don't remember if we pod expressed him home or if he just jumped or what he did, but he did leave, so we did actually get a Titan for that. Is Peppy Snowden still classified? Yes, we have not released that. How many tickets were sold in total? Mr. Hare, that's a good question. I know of two because I was involved with one and I heard about another one, but I don't know if there were any others. Reed, did the enemy kick him out of their alliance? I honestly don't know. I don't know if they did or not. Yeah, Mr. Hare, there were two silver tickets that I know of because I was involved with one, actually undocked in space, and then I heard about another one. Nobody actually did the golden ticket. That was never actually done, but there were at least two silvers. Yeah, I would assume. I agree, Ray. I would assume that that person did get purged. Yeah. Saphir, the golden ticket was to. It was a little what it was to a corp or an alliance. It was usually phrased as an alliance. It was an alliance leader coming to Mittens because he was head of the Imperium at the time to allow their people to escape, but just theirs. Um, and what the terms would be on that, I don't know because nobody ever actually did it. Um, I would assume it would have been uh, quite a bit of ISK or assets or something, but no one ever took him up on that offer. And so, if someone had done so, then they would have been allowed to leave the camp. They could have logged in all their people, and we would have done basically just like we did with the silver tickets, and just been like, okay, everybody, just stand down and let him go. But nobody ever took him up on that. So were people kicked out when they lost a Titan? They had a more of a tendency to like destroy rigs and to drop fleets, sorry, not fleets, drop corporations themselves, so it didn't show up on their kill board because they think their kill board matters. It doesn't. Nobody gives a shit about it. Well, we don't. We absolutely don't fucking care. Um, so were they kicked out for losing a Titan? Given some of the leaders' temperaments, I would not be surprised if that is true. I can't point to a specific incident off the top of my head, but it wouldn't shock me at all if it was. But them like dropping a corp to avoid a loss on a kill board absolutely is a thing. And because they cared about that so much, we had a brilliant AWOXing event years and years ago. We were still living in Declan at the time, and it was with a revelation. Right, is the dreadnought, and you got to be careful. So this was not the dreadnought; it was a revenant, the super carrier. So the revenant super carrier, the Sanchez one, and we had set up a whole event where we were going to do a blue shoot on this um, super carrier. We got everybody out in this system, and there was 3 or 4 full fleets of subcaps and everything like that, just bubbles everywhere. Lit a sino, and the revenant jumps in. We were all told it was a blue shoot, so the majority of us, including myself, had a blue overview up looking for super carriers because there were going to be no other super carriers, just going to be subcaps. Couldn't see it, couldn't see it, couldn't see it, and we're all like, what the hell? People have said it's jumped in. Well, when you go to a hostile overview, it turned out that we had infiltrated somebody into an enemy alliance who had gotten a revenant, and they AWatched themselves jumping this revenant into our space so that we could kill them, so it would show up on their kill boards. So that loss is on their kill board. And the pilot who was flying that revenant was the big red boat. Yeah, it was DBRB who was flying that revenant. It's actually his alt. They were pissed. I think I did actually get in on that kill, but I was looking around. I almost missed it because we were told it was a blue shoot, so I had a blue overview up, looking for it. And I mean, it was technically a blue shoot. But yeah, it was so Mr. Harris linked it there. That's the ship. It was a Revenant super carrier. So these are the things that spawn, or you get the BPCs for these from incursions. That's where those drop. Let me take a look at that loss you just put in there. Is it? Yep. Yep. From Mortis Angels in JU Tech. Yeah, that's the loss right there that you just linked. That's it. Let's see if I even got on that kill. Let me look at that. Yep, I did. What was I flying? Tornado. Yep, that was when we were using Blap tornadoes. Yeah, so I actually got on that kill myself. What was it worth back then? It's a really hard thing to say. It's quite a bit less than it would be today because of the changes to how supercarriers were made. And that kill being 10 years ago now, it was 2015. Um, it's hard to put those into perspective. That was before you really had the delve time units. We were still living in deck then. Um, it was before you really had the delve time units when we had supers down to, you could get a standard supercarrier for about 10 billion, give or take, at the height of the delve time unit. So, but that was 5 years or so, 4 years after that event. So that kind of thing is really hard to say. The cost of building the hull, it's basically no different than a regular supercarrier. Faction hulls, for the most part, are not more expensive because they've got a whole bunch of other things in it. It's you've got to get the blueprint. So the BPCs tend to be what causes the increased price on faction hulls. It's not always, but it does tend to be that way. Now, today, with something like um, if you look at the Ferox and the Ferox Navy issue, the Ferox Navy issue has a BPC that you've got to get that adds some expense to it. And then they've got other components to them that are unique to the faction items. And so you kind of get a double hit on that. Like cruisers and everything like that, you see those as well. Battleships, carriers, dreadnoughts, all those kind of things. So the main change was battleships, and then all capitals, supers, and titans have the new um, kind of subcomponents to them that CCP introduced in 2020. Um, those were used in the faction hulls as well. So like a standard cruiser doesn't have any of that stuff, but the faction cruisers do. So that pushes up their prices more. I honestly don't remember what the Ferox Navies are going for right now. I think they were like, I saw a list on that. I think it was like 220 or something like that for a Ferox Navy right now. I also heard the price spiked when they got announced yesterday. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it spiked
was
massively.
yeah. So the build cost of 120. These were fitted ones too, but yeah, I mean the build cost on these hulls between a faction and a regular one of the same class um, isn't all that much different. So the build cost is 120. Bane's saying the BPC is 45. That brings you to 165. Yeah, to fit, profit margin 220 is pretty reasonable for a faction battle cruiser. Depends on what the fit is. Oh, 120 is with the BPC? Oh, all right. Well, that's not bad then. That number may be off then. I thought somebody told me it was 220, but I have to admit I wasn't paying attention to it. It's one of the issues with non T1 and T2 stuff is that BPCs are very limiting for the most part. So you have to be introducing faction doctrines can be tricky to secure the BPCs. Hulls usually aren't too bad when you're dealing with cruisers and battle cruisers. Battleship ones can be a little bit annoying. Mostly you get that LP from uh, burners if you can, people doing burners, or faction war is a really good source of LP for that kind of stuff. Especially now that CCP's turned the LP transfers back on. When it was turned off, it was kind of a nightmare. Okay, is there any other little story you guys are interested in? So is there anything I miss about Old Eve? I mean, some of the mechanics I do. One of them that I do miss was, and there were issues about it, but it's the old SOV system with the sovereignty blockade units, right? Everybody called them SBUs. Um, it was tied to pause warfare, so the way you would go in and be able to claim systems with pauses, and so that was a little bit more fun. Um, Pauses would shoot back. They had automated kind of things to it. Uh, the Entosis system we use now, right? It's technically called Aegis Sov. Most of us call it Fozzy Sov. I'm not a fan of it. I've coordinated Entosis ops. Um, I don't really enjoy doing it. It's kind of a pain in the ass. Um, the issue with the old Sov system is it really put in because you had just HP that you would shoot through, right? You would literally just siege it and either have to gun down the old outposts or the SBUs or anything like that. It was a sheer HP thing. So as groups got more and more capitals and more supers, um, that kind of warfare with the SBUs themselves wasn't all that much different because you wouldn't really fight over the SBUs, you were fighting over the pauses. And so that's a different kind of mechanic, and you see that today to where a lot of people with Fozisov with the Entosis stuff, you don't see a lot of people fighting over the Entosis itself, with a critical node you might to break a constellation. Um, but most people go after the citadels, and they're shooting the citadels, trying to take away people's abilities to base in an area. And then once resistance has been broken, then they'll come back and do all the Entosis Fozisov shit because nobody likes doing it. Any interesting history around groups that have folded into goons, Weedot or others? So, I mean, it has happened. During the war during Vietnam, we had some people join us from the enemy side when they realized that, uh, you know, goons in the Imperium were not that bad, which is an interesting kind of piece. Our reputation exists in Eve for a long time, and it's not undeserved, especially in the early 2010s. That reputation was very well earned. But the big thing that so many people who have been on the other side, right, the enemy to us, and then they come and join us, is they're like, wow, you guys really aren't as big a dicks as I thought you were to begin with. It's like it's a really common statement. Um, So the AOMRR story, that one was just a massive, just clusterfuck. So AOM is Army of Mango, R was Ranger Regiment. This was a couple of groups who ended up being by far more intertwined than they were supposed to be. Um, and it turned out that the leadership in those groups was almost one person. It wasn't quite. There was a lot of very weird kind of things going on. It's almost like a crazy pyramid scheme of people who were controlling one piece and then kind of controlling or influencing another, and then one group kind of merged into it and then kind of took over. It was this very weird, like, like parasite invading something and then taking over. It was one of the strangest things. Yeah, the WTB is the other way of putting it. Yeah, that it was a very weird kind of way. They tried to join into it by merging into an existing group. Um, when we had told them that we weren't interested in expanding, so they're like, "Oh, well, we'll just join. We'll merge these two groups together because one was already in." Um, Yet still trying to be them their own little thing. It was a very weird. It was a huge headache. That's what it was. I hadn't thought about that one in a while, but yeah, that one was that one was pretty crazy at the time. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the original members of what was Deco and the CFC to who is still a part of us today. And honestly, I think besides Goons itself, is TNT and Lawn. I think those are the only three of the original ones that are still left. Yeah, I think it's just those three. Like several of the groups still exist, but they're not a part of um, the Imperium anymore, right? They're still around, but they're just not actively involved with it. One that doesn't exist anymore was one of my former alliances called FA. It's called Fatal Ascension. They were one of the people in the CFC and in DETCO, but they don't exist anymore.
But you can Fatal Ascension also.
I was a part of Fatal Ascension. There's Apple.
Hi.
Uh, Test was in DETCO. They were part of the CFC as well. Um, Back when the CFC was founded, it was founded to take Fountain away from an alliance called IT. Literally, the letters IT lived in Fountain at that point in time. This was a Bob remnant, or descendant, however you want to put it. Uh, we invaded Fountain, took it from them, and basically Test moved in and took over Fountain at that point in time. They stayed in Fountain until more or less they kind of went crazy. Their leadership just kind of went off the deep end. Um, and then we took Fountain away from them, away from Test. Yeah, but Test was a part of the CFC at that time. What do I think of the Empire Eve books? The first one, I remember when it came out, it was such a shocking thing that a real writer would be interested in our internet nerd, business. Um, it was crazy popular when it came out. I've got it. I have both editions or both volumes. I think he called them volumes, right? Volume 1, Volume 2. I have both of them. Um, I enjoyed them. There's pieces in the first one that I'm not that familiar with because I wasn't in leadership at the time. I was just more or less just barely playing Eve then. I started in 2009. So a lot of that first part is things that I've read about in other sources and heard about from people who were playing at that point in time, but it wasn't something I was really involved with. The second one, for sure, I was playing Eve. Um, got to see several of the battles that they talk about. The um, Asakai, I was not involved there with Asakai, but I do know all about it. The boat, the DBRB that we mentioned earlier, accidentally jumped instead of bridged his Titan. That's what kicked off Asakai. Um, the Battle of BR Tech, I was there for that one. I was doing some of the sinos to bring in some of our reinforcements. So I was involved directly myself with BTEC-R. I think it's I think he did a really good job given how insanely complex our Eve stories are. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets left out. But that's the case with any history. You can never record all of it because it'd be so long nobody'd ever read it. Uh, so I think he did a really good job given the limitations that he's got of trying to do a story, getting everything put into it. Um, you obviously only get the bigger pieces. Like when you look in the Battle of BTEC-R, um, my alt was there. He doesn't mention my alt by name. He never talked to me because I was one of dozens of people doing sinos. On our side and on the enemy side, there were sinos all over the place there. Um, so the contribution of the people doing those is mentioned, but he never mentioned my alt, and it's like, why would he? I'm one of dozens of people who did sinos, and remember, those engagements lasted for many, many hours. It was basically downtime to downtime is usually what stops those things is when downtime happens. Um, and BTEC-R kicked off um, because of a failed sovereignty bill. And so that engagement lasted, I don't remember what the final number was, but something like 20 hours, something like that. It wasn't a downtime to downtime thing, but it was not too long after downtime it kicked off. And that's an interesting one to see. Yeah, wormhole history is an interesting one. I've lived in wormholes over my Eve career a couple of times. They've changed an awful lot from when I first went into them. When I first went into those, they were brand new, like the guides that exist today. Of if you're in this system, it's got these kind of anomalies, it's got this kind of effects. None of that stuff existed. The first wormhole system that I lived in, we my corp at the time, we had no idea what we were doing. For those of you who have been in wormhole space, what I'm about to tell you is absolutely true, and you're just going to go, "Oh my god!" Um, we were living in a wolf rat system, and we took in shield tank drakes to do it in a wolf rat system. Um, and and he was just yelling at me right now in Fleet. He was, I told you we didn't know what we were doing, right? None of those guides existed. So for those of you who don't know what a Wolf Rat system is, it gives bonuses to armor and penalties to shields, and Drakes are shield tanked.
I think wormholes are great for one thing to travel, and for the rest, I don't care about wormholes.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people use them that way. Like wormholes is definitely the smallest kind of group of players. There's not that many people in wormhole space itself. Um, Most of us do them just like what Apple said. We use them to move fleets from one place to the other. I missed another question. Give me a second there. Was there a fight that really subverted your expectations, went way different than you expected? That's a good question. Let me think about that.
I think M2.
Yeah, I'll say the M2 is the one that keeps popping up to me. It was an engagement that, as so many engagements in Eve are, should never really have happened. And then it did, and it spiraled, I think, out of any of our control, and we're just like, what the hell? Um, it became kind of the defining engagement of Vietnam. And the thing to remember too, guys, is Vietnam lasted for months after M2 was over. It's not like M2 ended the war. That's not what happened. It lasted for quite some time after that. M2 was about halfway through Vietnam.
I think we can almost rename it these days to the Corona War. Like the reason it lasted that long because the whole pandemic was there and everybody was working from home. And like,
Sure.
I think that really, otherwise it never would have stayed that long.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100% there, Apple. If we hadn't been on effective lockdown the entire time, it's so for those of you who don't remember the time frame for this, right? So you all know that COVID, Corona, whatever you want to call it, began in the spring of 2020. It's debated depending on where you are in the world as to when those lockdowns started to happen. Let's say April, just so we've all got a starting thing. Uh, what we call Vietnam didn't kick off for several months after that. So everybody had been home for a couple of months, just going, shit, I'm bored. What the hell are we doing? And then there's this huge galaxy-wide war. Over 100 alliances, remember, were involved in the war. Mostly that number of alliances on the enemy side, but it was over 100 alliances involved in the war. And it's just, oh, okay, well, we can go and shoot nerds, and we're at home, we're sitting there. Um, I know I was working on my laptop. I had my laptop sitting on my desk, and I had my big desktop behind it. And so I would be doing stuff on my laptop and look up at my desktop, and oh, okay, let me click some buttons there in Eve. Um, and I think most of us did something like that. And then we get into this huge brawl that was right around New Year's. Again, M2 was right around New Year's between 20 and 21. Um, and you had the largest super capital engagement in Eve's history. In fact, the largest engagement, just period, but it was the largest super cap one too, um, where you had so many Titans just blown away. Uh, my thing is, a lot of people know I had been terribly ill that fall of 2020. I was just getting back into uh, doing Eve and able to do stuff. And I spent hours doing fighter bomber replacement for M2 because it was something I could sit down and do for a few hours before I had to step away. But it's those little kind of things.
I still want to thank our enemy in why in that were states in T5 for all the fighter bombers they supplied us. We've really stripped those markets and sent them to us. That was really amazing.
So what Apple's talking about there, and we've declassified this a couple of times for those of you who are not aware. The enemy was in T5Z, right? Literally one jump away, and we would have IS guys, Insurgent Squad, go out and find fighter bombers that were on their market, or maybe they left a fleet hangar open, and they would just yoink them out of them. Uh, and then we would use a little bit of a roundabout system, but a way to ship them back. And so we actually used to resupply our people with fighter bombers that we had stolen from the enemy or bought on their cheap market. So we would strip their markets, their people of them, and then we would turn around and do fighter bomber SRP and use their own bombers and go and shoot them. And we did that a lot. So I think of recent history, M2 would be the one. Yeah. Right. So if war happens again in the future, what do you think would be the cause of it, and who would be the participants? What would be the cause of it? Well, the cause is really simple. We hate them, and they hate us. This goes back to the era of Bob and all those kind of things. It's something that when you try and destroy an alliance in Eve, you can't, right? There's no killing an alliance in Eve. Here's what you do. You have to convince their players, right, their actual physical humans, to stop logging in or to change alliances. But you can't just destroy an alliance in Eve. That's not a thing. I mean, even if you go through and do something to where, like, you can disband an alliance, which has been done. That's what happened to Bob, and drop their sov, and you can do all that. Well, if those people haven't been, uh, had their morale crushed, they will simply reform, a few hours later under a new banner. So destroying a group is effectively impossible in Eve. Like, the name, sure, maybe that name doesn't exist anymore, but the people still do. And so those people from Bob that hate us and we hate them, they still exist today. You will find them in NC Dot, you'll find them in PL and in Horde, as well as a few other places. But those are the three primary ones that come from the Bob era. Now, FRT is different. They came from a different source, but they're aligned with Horde, and so, we hate them as well. So who would the participants be? It's the same people that it always is. Eve has a track record among the blocks in Null that every 5 years or so, there's a big nullsec throwdown, and it's pretty consistent. So, is there another war coming? Yes. When will it be here? I don't know, but it's coming. And it's going to have the same group of people in it. They may change sides a little bit, right? You get a little bit of change, like PGL's on our side now, which still blows me away even after all this time. He was historically on the opposite side. He was in test for a long time. Therefore, the enemy. But those things change. But that's the way it goes. So do the little symbol you got these days tell you the effect does not exist back then? Saphira, I'm not sure which symbol you're talking about there. Do you mean from
That was
Worm?
that was from back with the work conversation and the taking Drakes into a Wolfreya.
So those symbols did not exist back then. This was 2009, 2010. The way you would tell is you would open up your ship fitting window, right? And if you do that even today, you can see the stats on, shield resistance and armor resistance and DPS and, warp speed and all that kind of stuff is there. It's on the right side of your ship fitting window. And so when you would jump into a system, you could see those numbers change. But they didn't have a visual display above your capacitor like they do today. That didn't exist then. Yeah, everybody confuses me with Ragnar. It happens pretty much on a daily basis. Nemus was one of the people just mentioned in Fleet there. She was one of the people who was doing the restocks. If you are out flying in cap or a super cap and you put in a fuel contract, odds are pretty damn good it's Nemus who's filled it for you. I may put the fuel in the can that she uses, but she's the one actually clicking all those buttons. She does probably like 95% of those. M2 did make the Guinness Book of World Records for the most number. It set a couple of records. One was for the most number of humans. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's the most number of alts, of characters, whatever you want to say, that in one system at a time. That was confirmed by CCP's record. It shattered the previous record, which I believe was BR. And then it was the largest in terms of expense, like the cost of the things that were lost. That's one that you hear people a little kind of controversial on the cost of things, right? Because it's a video game. But since CCP sells Plex, it's actually pretty easy to calculate the exchange rate of a Plex to an ISK, and you can put that number on what that exchange rate is. The problem is that there's inflation in Eve just like there is in the real world. So when you all were asking me about the cost of that Revenant from 10 years ago, it's really hard to say because at that point, one Plex got you 1 month of game time. The Plex was broken into the sub pieces when they made Aurum years later, and so that value of Plex has changed. So if you were to see a lost mail from 2010, 2011, 2012, and had 1,000 plex in it, that was a massive amount of money. 1,000 plex today, nobody cares all that much. You'd be annoyed, right? But that's 2 months of game time. 1,000 plex in 2010 is 1,000 months of game time. So that's a huge difference. You got to remember that piece. So wasn't there an incident on the 3 Tech D gate when somebody showed up with hundreds of replacement fighters? Yes, that did happen. I am spacing who was our absolute hero who did that. But we loaded, I think it was a couple of people actually did that, but we loaded people down, and they were bringing out replacements like that. This was um, when we had been narrowed down into just the one DQ constellation itself, and there was most of the engagements took place in 3 Tech D. Of course, not all of them, but a lot of them did there. Mr. Hero, DSF managed to shut down Alliance. Yes, we did. We had somebody infiltrate Bob. Well, let me rephrase that. They came to us. So we didn't infiltrate them. They came to us, and we used their roles to shut down their alliance. And then we created a new Band of Brothers alliance that's controlled by goons so that they could not reform under that name. But that was during the Great War. Do you think we would be... I think you mean that would we be the people invading someone, or would somebody invading us? That's a really interesting question that I can't answer, since CCP just threw a huge monkey wrench into the way that SOV works and the way our space is laid out. And basically everybody is still looking at the system and going, okay, how do we change this? How do we optimize this? What's the next steps going to be? So there's no real way to answer that. And even if I could, I would flat out lie to you, because future plans. Oh yeah, the judge was involved with CO2. That was a really interesting system. The judge flipped to us from CO2. Having said that, CO2 betrayed us, so fuck those guys. They tried to mousetrap and annihilate our super carrier and Titan fleet back at the beginning of what we call the Casino War. So were you always confident in winning Vietnam, or is it a genuine existential threat? I expected us to lose all of our space. We would get back into LowSec, we would reform, and have moved somewhere else. As I said, I missed quite a bit of it because I was sick and in the hospital. When I recovered enough and I was able to come home and, starting to be able to use Discord again to talk to everybody, I was stunned that we had not lost. So, yeah, I fully expected us to have lost that war. It should have gone very differently. It's one of these things of, there were a number of mistakes made by the enemy. We were not perfect by any means. We fucked up a lot of stuff too. But we won. So, our mistakes were less dramatic than theirs. But yeah, they made a number of strategic mistakes. Not really talking about tactical mistakes. Everybody loses battles and engagements, but they made a number of strategic mistakes that really set it to where they just didn't win. The morale that I mentioned earlier is the most important commodity in EVE. And I will argue that to anyone. I don't care what the commodity is that you think matters, it's morale. Because if your people don't log in, you can have all the money in the world. You can have 1,000 Titans. I'll tell you, if you have 1,000 Titans in your hangar right now that you can give to your people, and 2 people show up, well, then you don't have 1,000 Titans. It doesn't fucking matter, because you could be just stomped by anybody else. So morale is what makes or breaks alliances and in wars. That's true in real life. to a certain extent, right? If you don't have enough stuff, it's hard to win a war. But in Eve, morale is everything. Um, our morale was not always the best. You know, when you're losing all your space, remember we lost effectively 4 entire regions down to 7 systems. That's a morale hit. But we also had people like Brisk doing the meta show with that ridiculous Curious George and Fountain Frank of his bits that were among the stupidest things you've ever seen, but it was funny. People enjoyed that. Some people hated those bits. I won't deny that, but it was a morale piece. You had our Battle Bard, as Merc has called him for years, on Saturday Night Swarm last night. He does those always on Saturday with Karma Fleet. He was doing his DJ thing and spinning tunes for people during M2 like constantly. That's the kind of morale we're talking about. It's you log in to see what your buddies are doing today and you sit on the fleets with them. What was my opinion on Down the Rabbit Hole as it pertains to the history of the game and accuracy? That one was a long ass video. I think it's 6 hours long. If I recall right, I watched it in 2 hour chunks, and it took me 3 days to watch it. It's very similar to the question that was asked to me earlier about the Empires of Eve's books. You can't put all of this stuff into a book. You can't put all of this stuff into a video, right? Nobody would read it. Nobody would watch it. It would be so long. I think he did a really good job with both the book, right, and the video. It's done by 2 different people, but I think they both did a really good job with it. The video covered things that I was more involved with, so there are mistakes that he made of attributing things to the wrong person, or something that got out of order in sequence. Everybody makes mistakes. It was it the best video I've ever seen of Eve? I mean, at 6 hours, I'm not sure I could say that because that's a long thing to sit through. Um, but I think overall he did a really good job with it. Just like I do the books, they're a slog to go through. That's some small ass print in those books. But I think they're well written, and I think the video was well done given the constraints that he had to do. There are pieces that's like, oh well, I wish he would have spent more time in the video on this particular piece and a little less on that, because for me personally, I'm more interested in that one thing and less interested in this other thing over here. But you always got to get context for why something's happening and why people are involved and why should they care. So for our Ray, when you go back to Vietnam, we're down to just 7 systems. Why didn't all the crabbers quit? The thing when you go into it that you should always bear in mind is you should never spend all your money in Eve. You should always have ISK around, and it's something that you do like a Hell War, and you don't do that, and you're just like, oh my god, I have no money. I can't go mining. I can't go ready. I can't do any of that stuff. And usually that first time when that happens to you is the big wake up call of, oh, I should not have done that. So the veterans of us, for the most part, carry a little more ISK or more stuff, right? It's why do you have 9 of these ships? Well, it's so that when 7 of them get destroyed, I've still got something. Oh yeah, Warlord there doing SRP stuff. Yeah, our SRP team, they get shout outs on a pretty regular basis. It's a really important thing that, as far as I know, all the Null groups do. I'm sure you can find somebody in Null who does not have an SRP program. I don't know of one off the top of my head. The major powers do. And it's, how do you do that SRP? The whole point to SRP is to get people back into the hull and back into the engagement as fast as you can possibly do it. And this is where if you have more than one hull, really comes in handy. So you can put in your SRP, and then you're already back in your replacement, and you're back out before the SRP guys even see it. The ability to reship and to get things off of markets and off of contracts forms a basis for it. It's again one of those cases of you can have all the SRP money in the world. If you don't have the stuff on the market, if you don't have the stuff on contracts, your people having YIST doesn't matter, right? It doesn't make any difference. There's a case we made for the other side, right? If you've got all of the stuff on the market, but your people don't have any ISK, well, then it doesn't matter that it's on the market if they can't buy it. We have tried to handle that from the second perspective there of we put the stuff on the market and then we lean on our SRP team who does a fantastic job of processing things, getting them going, getting people the ISK so they can get back into the fight.
Be happy that you don't get Globoons.
Yeah, some of our enemies do some really weird things. The vast majority of them is just straight ISK payouts that we do, right? It's just a straight ISK payout. Sometimes it's done with hulls. That depends on the situation. Subcaps almost always just straight ISK. But yeah, some of the enemy ones that we do, that we monitor, that we watch, and we're like, wow, okay, it's kind of a scam. It's my
So in Horde you don't get ISK, you get Gobloons, and then when you have 100 Gobloons, then you can get a payout, and in 1 Gobloon is 1 million ISK, so you need to have at least 100 Gobloons to get a payout. So if you lose a Harpy that's worth 50 million ISK, you have to at least lose 2 Harpies before you can get a payout, and those kind of things. So that makes things interesting and annoying, and not like what our team does. Like a lot of time when we're fighting, people have the, especially in big tie-dye fights, they have their SRP paid out before their they dead clone back home to buy a new ship. So like that's a big difference between us and our enemies. Why that makes ability for us to reship so good, and just make people happy that they get paid out that fast.
Yeah, our SRP team has a pretty extraordinarily high burnout rate, just because of all the work that they do. But those people on that team is just an incredible background, like heroes who do all of this stuff to keep the fleets going. Alexa, one thing that surprised me was there wasn't ever a big blockade of Delve during Vietnam. They tried, kinda. The big issue is we have NPC null in Delve, and the key is that there's more than one station and more than one system. And so blockading all of NPC Delve, which is where a lot of our jump freighter routes came through during Vietnam, is impossible. You cannot block all of them 24 hours a day, like 7 days a week, right? Every station in every system. They didn't have enough manpower for that, because if they did, people like Apple and the rest of our Sky team would have just said, all right, fuck you, we're going to take this constellation back, and would have attacked. So it's simply impossible. They couldn't do it. They tried. And they managed to do it for like a day. They could shut down our shipping for a day. And then the people would get burned out, and they're like, well, this is stupid. We literally sat here for a day, saw nothing. Maybe they popped a Sino, maybe they didn't. And then there people will be like, okay, I'm not joining that fleet again. It's extraordinarily difficult to do that. The camp that we ran in M2 that we've talked about multiple times tonight, remember, that was one station. We had one camp on one keep star in one system. NPC Delve, there's more than one station and more than one system. That's very difficult to control 24 hours a day. Yeah, it's funny. Nemus is talking about how the SRP team. There's a couple of them who are machines that process the SRP request. I don't remember if that's published publicly or not by Atrum, but I get a report that the directorate can see of how many people are in his SRP team and how many contracts each one of them do. And there's a couple of them that I don't know what Atrum has over these couple of people, but Jesus, they are paying off a debt of some kind, and it's insane.
He's like he says, he's just hiring Germans, and then they do a lot, and etc.
Yeah, the
So-
majority of the SRP team is German. That is very true. Atrum has said that for years and years. Yeah, Warlord, like you, I fully recognize your name, man. So why do some ships get SRP that is more than the cost of the ship? The big thing on that is when you look at, so Atrum looks at those numbers about once a month. He goes through and adjusts them based on markets. And the other piece is he actually looks at insurance payouts as well. And so the goal behind SRP is if you have platinum insurance on it, the SRP should cover everything. Now, we put in special programs sometimes to incentivize people to do it. You know, you get 50% extra SRP or double SRP or something like that. So those are things that do happen. It may be a simple case of when he looked at the numbers, it was 200 million for this hull, but once we got all the nerds in it, we managed to economies of scale that price down to 150. When I notice something like that, it's usually the other way. Is when I poke Atrum, I'm like, hey, the value's low on this. We should fix that. But he checks those about once a month. He goes in and looks at them and says, what is the current cost of these versus the insurance payout, the platinum insurance. And then when you do, a lot of corps have their own SRP program where they'll cover, most of them don't cover everything the Alliance does, right? They'll cover certain things. Logi was a classic example for this. A lot of corporations were doing their own SRP just for Logi to get, hey, we need more Logi. It's rare when I've joined a fleet and had an FC say, I've got too many Logi. It's usually I have no Logi or I don't have enough Logi. You know, it's very rare when I joined a fleet myself and had an FC say, I've got too many Logi. Please, some of you Logi switch out. I mean, it does happen, but it's super rare. How important are new players to the Alliance? Well, I'm going to speak on that more broadly. To Eve, they're critical, right? You can't sustain a game like Eve without new players, because simply speaking, the bitter vets get bitter and they leave. You know, they may leave permanently. They may leave for 6 months. They might leave until they get an email that says, you know, goons are being invaded. We need your help, which is what happened during Vietnam. And we had, I don't know how many of them came back. It was a large number of goons came back. Names that we hadn't seen in years. And you're like, oh shit, how are you doing, man? That kind of thing. But new players are absolutely critical to sustaining not just our alliance or any one of our corporations, but to Eve itself. I like to think that we as goons have a better training program than a lot of others, right? That's what Gooniversity is. But by no means is ours the only one. Most nullsec groups have a either training corp, a training alliance, a training sig, like we do with Gooniversity, to teach people new mechanics or to go, oh, this mechanic has changed. Imagine what it would be like if you came back from like a 5-year absence. You know, what things have changed in 5 years? I mean, a lot of stuff has changed in 5 years. Back before you all let Ankh tell you differently, he got his position and it's all his fault. The fact that I threw him under that bus is totally irrelevant to that. It's all his fault. Um, but I was the chair of classes for University, so a lot of the classes that we ran, I wrote them. I used to run those. I would hire a lot of the people to teach those because that training is so important. The free frigates that University gives away, that was not my program. I did not invent that. Um, but I wholeheartedly support it because it's super cheap. Those frigates cost literally nothing for us to do. I think the last time Enk came to me and said, "Hey, I need some hulls," and I came back to him, asked him if 500 would be enough. He thought I was joking until I handed him 500 hulls because we just don't care. Um, and there's the free frigates program that Mr. Harry is linking in there. It's that kind of thing is kind of an extension of an SRP program. It's intended to get new people into the fleets, out into space, so they can do whatever it is that we're doing. Uh, Apple and I are somewhat from the old school, right? We have big boy toys. Uh, well, a day one noob, I hope, is not in a Titan because that would probably end very badly for them. Um, but a day one noob in a Rifter can tackle an enemy FC just like Apple or I could with a Rifter. That's no real difference. I mean, we'd probably know who the enemy FCs are. Apple more than I do because he's the FC. I'm not. Um, but getting new people into Eve, absolutely. The other side, we need people who are not just in the fleets, right? We want people on the fleets, obviously. Um, but SRP money's got to come from somewhere. We need ratters out doing ratting. Ships have to be built. We need minerals. We need PI. We need ice. We need all that kind of stuff. So you always need new people for sure. There's never any question. I don't think you'd ever get somebody who's ever had to lead a corp or an alliance or do anything like that to say, "Nah, I don't really need new people. I'm okay." Usually, the person who says that is quitting Eve and doesn't give a shit anymore.
But yeah. Talking about classes, I was the one who started Logi classes. First Logi class I did was to train people how to use a basilisk so they could cat chain, because they believed long time ago, it was 2005, 2006, they believed that that guns couldn't Logi cat chain. And then we got a doctrine that uses basilisks, and then we did classes how to cat chain, and from there we started to do Logi classes and Logi anchor classes, and now they're on the University also. But before Reaver did it a long time, and before they went to University, I did them for years.
Yeah, classes are all about teaching people new skills or teaching them what has changed with it. Um, when you say there that you could do better with training, sure. I mean that's always a case, but you also have to remember that you're dealing with humans who need to run the classes and do all those pieces. So that was my thing when I was chair of classes, was just we need to run classes. There should be classes going every week on something, whatever it was. Sometimes we hit that target and sometimes we didn't. Um, one that we've talked about it a lot, especially with the patch that just came out, is the lack of Sissy. I used to do classes on Sissy all the time for mechanics that are difficult to do on TQ. It's most unfortunate that CCP turned that off, but there's nothing we can do about that. And the big ones we used to do there would be, we did an industry class on Sissy with reactions. I would actually set up a reaction citadel, and we just hand people moon goo and say, "Here, you're gonna react stuff for T2 production." But the other big one that we did for combat training was for cap pilots. Yeah, so do we have a plan to train cap pilots? It's very difficult to do that, simply because there is, real consequence to mistakes on it. It's something that we've talked about. Apple and I have talked about it with the rest of the directorate, trying to find ways to do it, and it's really hard. I wish I could give you an answer and say this is how we can do it, but it's super difficult to do. The old school way of doing it, which is how I learned how to do it. I don't know if this applies to you too, Apple, or anybody else, but I learned to do it by literally getting on a fleet and telling them, it's like, okay, I'm new. I wasn't new to the game. I wasn't new to goons, but I was new to being a cap pilot. I was like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And I don't know who it was, but somebody took pity on me and was answering all of my noob questions about how to jump and caps and all those kind of things. That's still what we do today. I've been on any number of fleets where that's still like, hey, I've just got my first super carrier. I just got my first, Titan, just got my first carrier. That's a thing. Conduit carrier fits win. That's a fitting thing. I haven't seen anything in the fitting channel about them doing anything with it, but I'm sure those guys are looking at it.
To conduit, you don't need to switch to fit. You just need a skill. That's just an inherent ability of the carrier. So to conduit subcaps. If you want to boosh, then you need a module, and yeah, maybe we look into that. But those things are extremely expensive at the moment, and so yeah, if people want to do that, they need to be a bit thinking of themselves how to fit their carrier with that and how to do that.
Could a lot of stuff not be done with a lot of theory? As Nima says, there's a difference between theory and practical execution of it. One thing that you can do with fighters, right, is getting used to how fighter mechanics work. Not the attack, that's not all that much different than a normal like F1 kind of thing, but moving fighters uses a multi-click grid system that if you've never encountered it, because the old fighter mechanics did not use that, it's a little bit weird. The Titan Doomsdays run on the same kind of thing. The Phenom generators on super carriers run on the same kind of piece. So getting a chance to actually try those out, if you've never used a carrier, you've never used fighters, just undock your carrier on the Imp Palace and launch a fighter squadron. Move it around the Imp Palace. Please don't do it while there's like 100 hostile nerds here waiting to shoot you. But just move your fighters around. You don't have to engage anything to see how they move. It's different. You will get used to it, but it's different. Yeah, he was saying how to control your fighters and not move your carrier. That's a critical thing. I have keyboard shortcuts set up on mine to select my deployed fighters and select my ship, and so I can toggle between the two. But it's something that you always have to watch out for. And there's a little blue ring around your capacitor when your ship is toggled, and there's a blue ring around your fighters when they are toggled. And in the middle of an engagement, sometimes, especially if you're multi-boxing, it's super easy to miss that little toggle. That just little ring that shows you that you've selected your ship rather than your fighters. And supers have the exact same mechanic, so this applies to carriers and to super carriers. They have the exact same. So squads go inactive, they reform, leadership gets burned out, they leave, the squad stops, right? We head shoot a squad, it gets reset as something else. That happens quite a bit. Some of them cause drama, and we step in and just go, all right, drama llamas are done. So squads reform, and new ones emerge, others get shut down. It happens.
That's why we don't have a wormhole squad for a long time.
Yeah, wormhole squads tend to end as drama llamas, and we've headshot like 3 of them or something like that. I think something like that.
I think Incursion Squad is up for the next time again to get a shot. Like, they haven't had drama in ages, so there must be something wrong with Incursion Squad.
That's a good point. No, Yeah, no drama in Incursion Squad, so shit must be broken. Yeah, I like it. The Incursion Squad is the other one that has had drama in the past, but as that was pointed out, it has not actually had a whole lot of drama of late. Cookie Swarm, yeah, that was a drama llama.
Yeah, we sadly lost with Incursion Squad. We sadly lost our Alliance PVE Super Cap FC.
So goons have been drama free. No, we have not. Goons are never drama free. When goons are drama free is when the servers are going to shut down, and it will simply move to something else. Goons don't do drama free. We do drama less and drama more, but drama free, no. Yeah, so Crab Swarm, yeah. So mining drama is a thing. It's something that during major wars, right? Mining and routing drama doesn't really exist because the Directorate doesn't care, and it's like, well, why aren't you out in the fleets, you slacking bastard? Peacetime drama is usually around mining or routing, and it's, oh my god, it gets annoying. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with a huge amount of it. Usually, by the time it gets to my level, some buddies, it's usually more than one, are going to get headshot for it. It's funny. If drama ticks up, we got to go to war. There's a little something to that. When goons enjoy too much peace, we usually end up at war for some reason. Right. So when we say headshot, we mean purged. So or airlocked. It's just you're out. You're done.
Joe Barbarian. Now I remember the name of our PVE Super Cap FC.
Which one? Who was it? I was trying to think of the name.
Joe Barbarian.
Oh yeah, Joe. Yeah. So yeah, if somebody has been headshot on a fleet, so you'll hear people talk about that in combat engagement. So a headshot is like when the enemy sees Apple flying, Apple parries on his man. They're like, okay, well, if we shoot Apple, then he can't coordinate his fleet as easily. That's a headshot, right? It's taking out an enemy leadership. In this context we're talking about for like drama, it's you're either purged from your group, or if it's bad enough, and it'd have to be really bad in like mining drama for it to rise to the level of blacklist. I can't really come up with a reason just for mining drama. You'd have to say something really obnoxious to get blacklisted from mining drama, but that would be like the ultimate headshot. It's you're out and you're not coming back. But in fleets, a headshot refers to taking out a Logi anchor, or usually it's referring to the FC itself. Like if our spies report that, Bob.
Spies, what are that?
Yeah, is Bob is commanding their fleet, then, Apple might look at it and go, okay, well, maybe I want to take him off the table right now and get him off of the field because he's causing damage. And they would do the same thing. They're like, oh, Toaster's out here, or Zindage is out here, Apple's out here, Asher's out here, like on their mains, which is why most of our FC team has alts that they use, and why there's backups in place, right? It's pretty rare when we do major engagements that it's one FC and that they don't have any backup to help take over the fleet. It's also why monitors exist. Yeah, monitors are difficult.
Like that Asher person, is that not somebody who was used to be an FC?
Yeah, I do believe Apple back in the day. Yeah, way back in time he was.
Yeah. I loved like as an FC. I'm still not a fan of the monitor as an FC ship. It's there now, and we have to live with it. It's there for many years. I loved like my Brick Tank Legion as an FC ship, or like a nice Hector, Brick Tank Hector, or anything like that, because you just had more abilities to do that, and now you cannot do that. Everybody has a monitor, so you have to see from a monitor. But yeah, I really loved like those kind of things more than what you see now. But yeah, that's what we just have to live with.
So the Monitor, for those of you who are not familiar with, is just it's a cruiser that's more or less difficult to kill. It's just kind of hard to hit them. Yep, there it is right there. It's also called a flag cruiser. Yeah. They're not really great. They can combat probe things. Has a target painter so that they can, get on kills because, of course, all FCs are kill mount whores. Do all those kind of things, but the big thing is the signature radius and the resist on them. So they were put in place to try and prevent the headshots that Apple and I were literally just talking about. For the most part, it has succeeded with that. It's not impossible to headshot an FC in a Monitor. You can absolutely do it. But usually it's easier to start killing their Logi and or their DPS and just leave the Monitor, because the Monitors have no offensive weapons. The Monitors the FC command chips that Apple was just talking about, like the Legion or Hectors or whatever, would be capable of doing something like that, but Monitors don't. They don't have any offensive weapons. They target paint you and that's it.
This is basically a fit one. That's like you don't really like. You have some things in a booster bay. You have some probes, and like for rest cheap modules on it, because why be expensive? Because you don't use them.
Yeah, the most expensive thing on that fit, besides the hull itself, is the probe launcher.
Yeah, because you want all the bonus for all the probes you can have. And you know what's funny with these ships? If you put, let me see if I have a set here. I haven't put them in for a while because we haven't I didn't subcap fleece. But if you put a Halo set in, an implant set that's Halo, that gives some bonus to ship signature radius. So like the signature radius of this ship is already very low, so it's hard to hit, and you lose a lot of damage. But if you then use an Halo set over that and then boost, like you're so small, like it's very hard to get hit and those kind of things. So there's some funny things you can do with that.
So when was the last time we used Titan Swarm like as a full on deployment to it? A big, like, true throwdown would have been M2. We use Titans mostly for bridging. Now you don't see Titan engagements that much. They become so expensive that CCP's kind of neutered people's willingness to throw them at things. But the last big throwdown of true engagement of Titans was an M2.
You have used supers like in Delve a decent amount of times to kill some stuff and like other things. We used supers a few times, like in the north, like when we killed the X-47 Fortizar because of a Keepstar. We gated in supers because that was impossible in a jammer, because that's why the reason why they couldn't kill 1DQ. So we proved that you still could gate supers into a system and do those kind of things. So like we have used them since then, but yeah, the use is there. Dreads are king now at the moment, and I think with the new updates, carriers are very interesting also. So yeah.
Yeah, it's something like Apple was just saying, right? Your question was specifically on Titans, and it is a difference between Titans and Supers. So Supers we've used by far more, Titans is less. I'm not sure if you meant like Super Capitals including Supers or Titans. Your question specifically said Titans, so that's what I was looking at. Did it really change anything about the PvP performance? Do you mean the carriers?
They have some interesting options, and also I think carriers have been underutilized lately. Like they are less, but for certain things carriers are still very good. And I think, especially when the enemy is using more and more dreads and battleships in fights, I think carriers are a good part also in that engagement that can be used. So yeah, so there are some interesting things to be done. Yeah, they double the damage for DDs, but that for Titans, but that still doesn't make them. You still rather have supers on grid than Titans, because when you DD, you're stuck there for 4 or 5 minutes. and when you supers have fighters, they can move around on the grid. They can not only fight dreads more easily, but they also you can do some things against subcaps more easily, etc. So using supers is more useful in general. Faction fighters are garbage, yeah. Don't get faction fighters. Just train towards T2 and use T1 until then.
They introduced the shadow fighters years ago, and everybody's like, "Oh my god, this is the coolest thing ever." They're just awful. They're so expensive what they do, but they those of you who are not familiar, you can ram them into an enemy target, but it will destroy your fighter when you do it, and they're just insanely expensive. Everybody thought they were the coolest thing, but they're just terrible. Yeah, they did bring in the new faction fighters. I mean, I'm with Apple T1 until you can fly T2. They did double, as was mentioned, they did double the DD output on Titans. But yeah, so it's twice as much. Basically means that a regular cap cannot take a DD hit and survive. The old DDs, they could. You could actually tank, to a certain extent, one DD hit. The new ones, it shouldn't be possible. We'll have to see. So it's always an interesting one. Like, the numbers may say yes, and then you get on the field and you actually try it, and there's something that you didn't account for. I mean, that does happen a lot. So you used to be able to tank multiple DDs. I don't believe that's still the case now, but I have not looked at it with like the faction dreads and stuff like that. So like a T1 dread wouldn't be able to, but like an RNI or a PNI may be able to. I haven't actually looked at that number. I'm sure Zintage knows and Apple probably does, but I don't know off the top of my head. I guess it would depend too on what you mean by properly tanked. Like if you shield and armor tanked your ship, that's easier to do. Like if you use both, that's definitely easier to do. The other thing you got to look at too is when a DD hits, it's an alpha strike. So it doesn't matter what your shield regen rate is, it's going to blow right through it. So that may be one of those when you look at, oh, here's my effective EHP number, and it will tank 2 DDs or something. And it's like, well, it won't because you don't have a shield regen on it, right? That effective piece is also looking at shield regen. Looks at resistance, but looks at shield regen too.
Yeah, you can. I think faction dreads can. It takes 3 DDs to kill a faction dread at the how they're fit, depending on how they're fit. So yeah, it's like things like carriers, depending on how they're fit, and those kind of things are a bit iffy. But otherwise, yeah. Still, I still would rather bring supers in general and have titans in the backhand to jump if they jump titan dreads on our supers. Then we can jump with titans too. And then DDs are very useful because then you can just, if you drop a shitload of titans, then you can just chunk so much damage from them, and then you can just kill the dreads off the field very fast. Then they're useful, but not in the first engagement.
So we've been going about an hour and 40 minutes now. I think we'll kind of wind this down. Does anybody have any last question or two?
Yeah, this is not much history anymore. This is more fitting and how to do things, indeed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's also a history of Eve is how the ships work. So, there's a little bit to that. But if I'd known you guys were going to do this, I would have poked Zintage and been annoying to him and made him come here. Because he's, does all this fitting stuff. What is your favorite mod? Whichever one lets me get out of the bubbles.
Maybe you should just have Zintage do like a talk about fitting and all those kind of things. I think a lot of people like that. Maybe you should just annoy him for that anyway.
That might Might do that. Because yeah, it's an interesting idea there. So prop mods, most of the ships that I use with prop mods are MWD fit. Use ABs when you need them, like on ESS grids, but most of the ships that I use are MWD fit.
I'm a big fan of ABs because I like brawling doctrines, and sadly, brawling is not that active anymore. Though rogues are very good for brawling, so people can tell you what you want, but brawling with rogues is amazing. But yeah, I like brawling, so I like AB doctrines, and then like sick tank stuff, etc. I really like that, like the good old days when we could fly Legion, Proteus, fleets, etc. Oh yeah.
So, but what size? My favorite ships to fly are cruisers. The only ships I ever FC are bombers on the super rare occasion when I do that. But I always like flying cruiser hulls. So those are the 50 MN range.
He's not for oversized stuff, so
My thing with oversized prop mods on them is the turning radius turns to shit, and I don't like that. They are useful for sure, but yeah, I usually use 50 MNs for it. Mine are all T2 because I'm just cheap and don't use anything else. When I faction stuff, I usually faction like shield extenders or points or things like that. I don't usually do it with the MWDs.
I think restraint is the one that used the least amount of cash cap. I like those because I like a lot of capacitor.
I really like missile doctrines, so cap's not a big deal with that. Give missile, I like that.
I don't like missiles. Guns, direct application. Oh, that's so much better than missiles.
Yeah, I always just enjoyed the missiles. Like the Drake was one of my favorite. Drakes and Caracals, my two favorite hulls. When I first started playing Eve, and they still are.
Augur Navy issue. Still miss that doctrine. Still miss the ship being good.
I never cared for those. The big thing too is when you hear people, talk about the, FC, can I bring my Drake? That's a meme now, but in the about 2011 to about like 2014, 15, that was the hull. Everybody in Nullsec used Drakes. It was the thing. You would get on grid, and it's all right. We're gonna shoot this Drake, and then this Drake, and then this Drake, and then this Drake, and you would just have missiles flying everywhere. They were killer to the servers. CCP came through and made an update to them to missile themselves that drastically lowered the requirements for them. I remember they presented it at a fan fest one year, and we were all sitting there, and you could see the way it was moving on the client was just insane. It had cut the requirements, like the system resource requirements, like 90%. It was crazy. And then, of course, what did we do? Then we started cramming more people into the system, firing more missiles. Then you get things like firewalls and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's kind of a nice history of Eve to end on. Is as soon as CCP makes something run better, we find it and like, oh, well, that means we can cram more people into a system to do something. And then everything goes back to us complaining about it and just going, God damn it, the servers don't work. It's like, well, they work just fine until you assholes shoved 5,000 people into a system. It's like, oh, well, that's fair, but get better servers. And then they do, and then, it's like, oh, well, it's rated 6,000 people. It's like, all right, we'll put 7,000 in there. And that's been the history of Eve as long as I've done it, is always like, okay, we get new technology, right? There's optimized something, and cool, that means we can shove more people into the system to shoot each other. Yeah, the N+1, that was a big thing, going back to one of the first questions today of old mechanics with the old fleets using Aegis Sov, it was really an N+1 game. Yeah, we made the server better. Time to break that record. Yep. Yeah, again, history of use pretty much in that statement. I will do one last question. If anybody's got one more, then we'll call it a day today. Oh yeah, Logi stacking penalties. That was annoying when they first introduced it. It kind of makes sense, but yeah, that radically changed the way we deployed fleets. Yeah, 300 people crashing the servers. Sure, absolutely. That was for sure a thing. You'd actually still see it on Sissy back when it was used. You'd get like 50 or 100 people to jump in, and they would lag something terrible, just because the resources allocated to it were so bad. It wouldn't even spawn all the systems. You'd be flying, and you'd get to it, and it would give you a traffic control when there was nobody anywhere. And it's just that they had not actually spawned that system, so they had to load the entire system as you were trying to fly through it. I should say, as you were trying to jump into it, you'd have to load everything. Yeah, I think we'll call it a day. So we're at like an hour and 45 minutes, so that's not too bad. You all go enjoy your Sunday. Have a good weekend, and we will see you all for the fireside on Saturday. And for the next one of these things, I will do my best to annoy Zintage until he agrees to come and talk about fitting and how all the fittings stuff and everything works. So, yeah, have a good day there, everybody.